Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 14th of November. Thanks for joining us tonight. As always, you can get your latest weather forecast information anytime by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. That's your link to all of our weather information that we have on our website as well, weather.gov/Alaska. One click will take you to your local weather forecast office. You'll also find links to the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center that has important information for you tonight about the Ketchikan Dam and the Ketchikan Creek there. That flows, of course, right through Ketchikan. If you can't find what you're looking for, whether it's on mobile.weather.gov, a smartphone or tablet-friendly way to get internet information on your phone and mobile device, feel free to email me at david.snider@noaa.gov. I'm privileged to serve you any way I possibly can, and I'm always happy to hear from you. Here's a look at what's going on around Ketchikan right now. Here is the lower Ketchikan Lake, and one of the gauging stations we have at the dam is showing very high water there, coming up toward the top of the dam. It's not overtopped, but there is water flowing over the top of the dam, as we've heard. And because of that, a flood advisory is in effect because you've had 4 inches of rain in the last 24 hours, and another inch of rain seems likely before this wraps up. The Ketchikan Creek flows right into Ketchikan, and if there's additional high water that comes out of the Ketchikan Lake, a flood advisory is in effect now. But I would like to have everyone in the Ketchikan area have a way to get weather alert information in case more water is coming downstream. And if that is the case there, you want to know about it right away, as flooding would occur if additional water is coming out of that lake there. So make sure that you have a way to get emergency information in case high water is coming your way. Right now, a flood advisory is in effect, and that'll take you through Friday for the Ketchikan Creek. For all of our friends watching in Ketchikan, this is important information. Weather.gov/Juneau will have additional weather information and information about this flood advisory for Ketchikan. You can see that over the last 24 hours or so, in fact, all the way back to Thursday, water has been coming up there. Here's the record stage at about 350 feet. We're not quite there yet, but it is certainly approaching that fairly quickly. It does look like, the good news is that it does look like in the last hour or so, some of that, the water level has come down just a little bit there at the Ketchikan Creek at Lakes Dam. So again, folks in Ketchikan, make sure you have a way to get important safety information about water coming downstream. Hazardous weather elsewhere is still going on there across the Susitna Valley. Winter storm warning still in effect. That'll go until 6 o'clock tonight. Looking for another 1 to 2 inches of snow, mainly north and west of Talkeetna. We've had several inches of snow in that area already. Roads pretty slick around the south central area, all the way from the Kenai Sterling Highway area, and then up through Anchorage, of course, with rain falling on cold roads. Some of that has frozen on contact. Conditions are improving around the Matanuska Valley there, as we understand it, and the winter storm warning that was or the advisory that was in effect for the Copper River Valley has been allowed to expire. There has been several inches of snow, maybe about 4 to 6 around the Copper River Valley out toward Glen Allen. As you move northward into the hills in the eastern Alaska Range, winter storm warning is still in effect there. For the eastern Alaska Range, storm totals of 7 to 15 inches of snow are still possible, still on target there for that to improve around 6 o'clock on Friday morning. The upper Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country, again, still under a winter storm warning there, looking for some gusts there, probably reducing visibility over some of your highway passes, but storm totals are also around 7 to 15 inches. Things should improve here by noon tomorrow. In the upper Koyukuk Valley and the Yukon Flats, also looking at some light amounts of snow, but mainly blowing snow is going to be the big noticeable issue here. Snow amounts on top of what you already have now should be generally light. The central interior out toward Tanana, probably looking at about 2 to 5 inches of snow. Gusts to 50 miles per hour, though. Conditions should improve by midnight on Friday. Now, for our friends watching in Fairbanks and the Deltana and Tanana Flats area, generally looking at lesser amounts of snow, maybe 2 to 5 inches of snow, storm total again, but it has started snowing there now, as the forecasters were talking about there from the Weather Forecast Office in Fairbanks. And you may see some gusty winds, but it does look like the bulk of your wind is going to be around the 25 to 30 mile an hour area. So most of your issue is going to be snow, and conditions will probably be slick because of that. The higher winds will be all around you in the hills, as is usual. Out to the west and to the north, we're looking at wind advisories here. and winter weather advisories for the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys as well. And it looks like we're going to be dealing with generally gusty conditions, maybe up to about 45 miles per hour for this region there. A lot of wind blowing off of the Brooks Range and out to sea. High wind warnings continue for the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island area. Gusts to 60 miles per hour are possible there before that improves. Looking like we'll probably see high winds through at least tomorrow morning. After about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, your wind should improve. And the same goes for the wind that we're looking at across the lower Yukon, the lower Koyukuk, and the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys there. Again, gusts in these regions to about 45 miles per hour. So a lot going on, and really all of this has to do with a major storm that's sitting across the northern Gulf. And you can see that in the low pressure pattern right here. This is the main system. There's another piece of that just to the south, but you got a low here and another low right on top of the Kenai. And all of this has grabbed a substantial amount of colder air and is working that right across the Alaska Range and pushing that out to sea. The pressure gradient is tight, and that's moving an awful lot of wind across the interior and the west coast today. Out ahead of that, a front working inland is squeezing out an awful lot of rain. Again, 4 inches of rain or so around the Ketchikan area just in the last 24 hours. And if you're thinking, gosh, you know, hasn't it been fairly dry? Well, it hasn't been that dry in southeast for a number of weeks now. So those really stagnant, dry kind of weather pattern conditions that we had for a large part of the fall and a large part of the summer and a large part of the spring, really, the last couple of years, a lot of that has kind of fallen by the wayside, and we've gotten into a much wetter pattern now, especially for southern southeast, which is great news, but it's all coming down at once now in Ketchikan. So you've had about 4 inches, might get another 1 inch additional rainfall. So we're watching the dam there, and we're watching Ketchikan Creek, and folks in Ketchikan need to have a way to get weather alerts if you don't already. Out across the west, a lot of cold air spilling southward. That's great news if you need some ice along your coastline. It does look like there will be additional ice growth here across the YK coastline as we go into the next several days. There is a lot of cold air is moving southward. Still looking at additional growth inside of Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound and Norton Bay itself, and along the North Slope communities there. The Beaufort Sea ice is looking more and more on a positive note. Might be closing off the Beaufort here within the next week or so. So great news. We'll have an ice update for you in just a little bit. In the meantime, wintry weather continues across the Susitna Valley. It does look like there will be additional light freezing rain around the Anchorage area and some of the south central roads as we head into tomorrow morning. So plan for that. Even though you won't see a warning or a watch if it's still looking fairly light in the forecast, it's still possible that we're going to see some additional accumulating ice on roadways, even if we don't have an alert out. So it's a little bit more of that winter weather coming your way, disguised as rain. As that front is moving ashore, watch for that broad easterly flow to continue across most of the interior. That's going to help keep that snow flying in the region. Looks like some areas there out around, let's see, the Tok region, probably have seen somewhere on the order of about 7 to 10 inches of snow already, probably looking at a little bit more too. That was a report from much earlier in today, and we know it's been snowing out there. Showers and maybe a little bit of convection. I wouldn't be surprised to get a lightning strike or two across the southern outer coast, certainly over the open waters of the Gulf with this vigorous low pressure system at 980 millibars. Another low is just going to lurk out here across Bristol Bay. That's going to keep snow going. And again, you won't see a warning for this, I think, across the southern parts of the Kuskokwim Delta region. But from about Clark's Point to Good News Bay, you may see as much as 6 to 9 inches of snow. It's going to be a fairly concentrated area right here across the Kuskokwim Delta coastline. But 6 to 9 inches of snow is possible in your area. And again, that's all due to that low pressure system sitting right there along the coast tonight. Now, as we get into Friday, notice the pressure contour bands haven't changed at all. So blowing snow is probably going to continue across the central and western interior. And again, that ribbon of snow is just hovering right here from places like Togiak. You're likely going to see some shovelable snow. You're going to get a decent amount. All across the Aleutians and the eastern chain, showers there. All that extends all across the northern and eastern Gulf. And you're probably going to look at some periods of heavier rainfall across southern southeast. That should improve, though, and become a little more showery with time. Snow continues across the central and eastern interior, but that, too, is improving. Light snow and areas of fog will be possible Friday across the North Slope. I had some dense fog out around Kaktovik this afternoon. Out across the central and western chain, showers continue. Nothing too substantial, it looks like, with low pressure Moving back into the western part of the Bering at 983 millibars. The low here in the Bristol Bay region still there. Snow's still going to fall. And again, the crossed arrows mean a blowing snow threat for the Yukon Valley all the way through Saturday afternoon. Snow showers for the Chukchi coast and low pressure moving very close to the outer coast of southeast at 982 millibars. Wind and snow and rain will be possible, especially northern southeast and southern southeast, generally windy and wet. Here's a look at your temperatures now. As we go into Friday morning, lower 40s, mild but wet and windy for southeast. Temps hovering very close to, if not just below freezing for south central. Kenai at 32, Homer 36, Kodiak 41, all the way in Talkeetna, upper 20s there, and falling off fast for Fairbanks at 3, 7 below in Fort Yukon, Anaktuvuk Pass and Arctic Village, 20 below. Teens, 20s, maybe hovering closer to 30 around the Wainwright area. Utqiagvik 19, Nome 14, 20s and 30s for Bristol Bay, and much colder as you head into the Yukon Delta. 8 below for places like Amonuk, Hooper Bay, Macoriac 16, a high of 22 on Friday. The North Slope communities and the Beaufort in the single digits there. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse about 2 to 5 degrees, 21 for Utqiagvik, 33 in Shishmaref, 37 for Gamble and St. Lawrence Island, 40s and 50s in southeast. Our warmer spots there, 45 in Cordova and wet. And out across the chain, lower 40s there. Unalaska Dutch Harbor dropping to 36 Saturday morning, 37 in Gamble and Savunga, 2 below in Fairbanks with a high on Saturday up to 6, with South Central holding in the mid-30s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR concerns will continue across southeastern Alaska, all the way across the northern Gulf, through Kodiak Island and into Bristol Bay and the southwestern Capes and just outside of the Kuskokwim Bay. North of the Alaska Range, especially the eastern side, and pushing its way into the Tanana Valley, you'll see IFR concerns. They're mainly around the Deltana and Tanana Flats region and into the upper Yukon Valley and 40-mile country. Most areas north of that, though, especially north of the Yukon, are looking at a VFR start tomorrow. Problem is it's going to be really windy. There will be a lot of turbulence, it looks like, on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range all the way out toward Kotzebue Sound. You'll see that here in just a minute. As we go through Friday afternoon, you'll notice IFR lingers across southeast all the way across the northern Gulf, still hovering across Cook Inlet, though we may see some improvement around the Susitna Valley. Parts of the Copper River Valley may break out, but it looks like IFR will linger around the Tanita Pass region and then northward into the upper end of the Yukon Valley. Parts of Southwest also looking at IFR. Widespread marginal conditions across the Bering Sea and very close to the coastline, but it does look like VFR will be found across most of Norton Sound, all the way out toward St. Lawrence Island and into parts of the Bering Strait. Kotzebue Sound looks okay, and most of the North Slope will linger under marginal conditions through your Friday afternoon. Here's Saturday now, and no big change for southeast, it looks like, as we start up the weekend. Prince William Sound still holding under IFR, and IFR stretches from southwest, south of, looks like, Lake Clark all the way up toward Lake Iliamna and up the western side of the Alaska Range, and still holding over the upper end of the Tanana Valley with marginal concerns fairly widespread there. And all the way across the west, it looks like we're going to be looking at marginal conditions through most of the chain and the Alaska Peninsula, at least with the Chukchi Coast and just east of Point Barrow looking at marginal conditions. That spreads eastward a little bit more on Saturday afternoon. Southwest looking at widespread marginal conditions, but you'll notice the IFR has vanished from Saturday afternoon out west, so good news there. Improving conditions will also be found across the Alaska Range into the upper end of the Tanana Valley, Prince William Sound, and then IFR still holding firm across a large part of southeast, in fact all the way to the north and west of Yakutat, almost to Cordova. Here's your pass conditions now for Friday. It looks like Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass are both going to be looking at VFR conditions there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass go from marginal in the morning to probably more IFR in the afternoon. Rainy Pass will show marginal conditions most of your Friday. Same goes for Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass will likely head that way, but after an IFR start. Mentasta Pass, it looks like marginal conditions through most of the Friday period, and Tanita Pass will likely push over to marginal concerns in the morning and then maybe worsen to IFR later in the day. Portage Pass holds at IFR levels all day long, and Chilkoot and White Pass, as we saw, looks like it'll be in the muck for at least Friday and Saturday at this point, and maybe into Sunday. Freezing levels indicate that warm and wet air that's been pushing its way into south central and southwest the last couple days is now sliding a little bit more off to the east. So levels stretch from about 2,000 feet near the capital city to south about Ketchikan and Nanette near 4,000 feet there. Out across Cook Inlet and the northern end of Kodiak Island. Kodiak itself very close to the 4,000 foot level tomorrow morning, and southwest you're looking at 2,000 foot levels there close to King Salmon and Dillingham. North and west of that, everything is sub-freezing all the way down to the surface, which you can see riding right over the Alaska Peninsula. Icing potential is still with us. We still have levels around 3 to about 4,000 feet across the southwest, about 4,000 feet across the northern Gulf, and a little bit higher north of that as the core of that cold air is actually sliding across the northern parts of the Gulf. We have isolated moderate across most of south central, in fact the southern half of Alaska, with southeast holding around above 5,000 feet or so for isolated moderate, and another wave coming in from the west. There's plenty of moisture, but the trick is a lot of this is also running into areas of precipitation, which is really eliminating a lot of the widespread icing potential in some of those areas surrounding low pressure for now. Low pressure sitting across southwestern Alaska is pulling in a strong little jetlet around 50 knots or so. The main core of those fast-moving winds out over the North Pacific taking a jog southward and then quickly moving back north toward southeast, anywhere from 50 to 100 knots, and high pressure up across the Chukchi, sending in a northerly flow at 55 knots right across the north slope. You can see that at 9,000 feet, 40 to 50 knots there. Low pressure across Bristol Bay, helping to bring in southerlies across southeast and south central, and north and easterly winds moving across the interior there, 40 to 50, 60 knots, and very fast moving air on the south side of the Brooks Range. You'll see that showing up in turbulence here in just a minute. Low pressure is the main culprit there, pulling that in with northwesterlies across the central chain and strong southerlies coming across the eastern Gulf. Those will continue. So we're watching for the potential for considerable moderate and isolated severe across the Koyukuk Valley and the middle Yukon Valley, mainly below 4,000 to 6,000 feet, and some chop across the Gulf.
The Disappearing Dipper.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regis, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. Hey James, what's the most recognizable star pattern in the sky?
Oh, that would, of course, be the smiling Dehne Regis asterism.
Well, obviously, put any number of stars together and you might imagine that. And we can't forget the James Albury Hercules constellation.
Well, duh.
But I think the easiest to identify is the Big Dipper.
Definitely. There's something about those 7 semi-bright stars that grab your attention.
And the Big Dipper is up almost all year round.
Emphasis on the almost.
Yes, and there is one season where the Big Dipper dips so low in the northern sky that it may become invisible.
And that season is now. We're going to head out to the stars and show you where not to look for the Big Dipper in the sky.
And when you can see it again. I know it may seem weird that we're doing a show on what not to look for in the night sky, but we don't want you to freak out when you step outside and not see the Big Dipper.
The Big Dipper is always somewhere in the northern sky. We call it circumpolar since it can be seen making a complete circle around Polaris, aka the North Star.
When you face north and watch the stars long enough, you'll notice that they move in a slow counterclockwise circle around one point.
That pivot point is the North Star. Any constellations near the North Star make a tiny circle around it, like the constellations Ursa Minor, which includes the Little Dipper stars, Cassiopeia the Queen, and Ursa Major, which includes the stars from the Big Dipper.
But the Big Dipper can get low in the sky in its nightly journey around Polaris. So while most nights you can see the Big Dipper somewhere in the northern sky, for about 2 months it can skim across the horizon and be blocked by trees, buildings, or the ground itself.
And so, on November evenings, you'll have a hard time finding the Big Dipper. Man, that's a bummer.
This annual disappearance of the Big Dipper is chronicled in some Native American myths. Instead of a big spoon, they saw a big bear. Now, the normal picture of the bear shows the body with a long, stretched out tail.
But other Native American groups pictured it a little differently. The Iroquois tribe saw the 4 stars in the spoon as the bear, and the 3 stars in the handle as 3 hunters.
The first hunter is carrying a bow and arrow, the second is carrying a pot, and the third is carrying sticks to make a fire.
Now look carefully at the second hunter. The bright star is called Mizar, but if you squint, you may be able to see a dimmer star above it. That is the star Alcor, and it can be seen with the naked eye too. Mizar can be the hunter, and Alcor is the pot that he is carrying. As the night moves on, it looks like the hunters are chasing the bear. Legend has it that when the bear is too low in the sky and becomes invisible, that the hunters finally caught him. And this happens on the evenings of October and November every year.
And what happens to the trees every October and November in the northern United States? Storytellers would point to the changing leaves as evidence of a cosmic battle.
Exactly. Now this may be a little gross, but they would say that the first hunter had shot and killed the bear, and its blood fell from the sky and turned the leaves on the trees orange and brown and red.
And that's why you can't see the Big Dipper in the night sky this fall. But don't worry, it will be back.
In fact, if you stay up past midnight, you can see it standing on its handle.
And every spring, the bear comes back to life, the hunters resume their chase, and the leaves return to the trees.
The circle of life in the stars. It's all there when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice edge. As of the 14th today, we're seeing a lot more pack ice around the Beaufort Seacoast and pushing west there, and a lot of what you're seeing north and east of Utqiagvik is filling in. We have still a large area of open water, not sea ice free anymore, but certainly open water off the Chukchi coast, but you can see some of that more substantial ice building down the coast into the upper end of Kotzebue Sound, up around Norton Bay and the north side of Norton Sound, and then marginal ice down here across the southwest YK coastline. So we're looking for a lot of changes in the next week, and a lot of that is going to happen here across the Chukchi coast, and especially right around Utqiagvik. A lot of this ice is working its way around Point Barrow too, so watch for changes again on the north slope. As we go into Friday for southeast, look for a south and steady wind around 20 knots or so for most of the inside passage. Gust to 35 knots around the Lynn Canal southerlies, bringing 4-foot seas through. Gust to 35 there as well. The outer coast, 25 knots, generally about 20 knots as you head south of Sitka and Port Alexander into the Dixon entrance. 15 knots for you, 15 to 16 feet across the northern Gulf there. So a lot of water, a lot of wind, and certainly some gusts on the inside passage tomorrow. Winds are going to reverse course on Saturday. Northeasterlies blowing off the mountains anywhere from 20 to 25 knots. Gusts to 35 in the Lynn Canal the other way. 4-foot seas expected there. And southeasterlies 30 knots with a 10-foot sea in Clarence Strait. Look for southerlies coming up the outer coast, 20 to 30 knots. Anywhere from 12-foot seas around Yakutat and Icy Cave to 16 feet south and west of Craig in the Dixon entrance there, with low pressure hovering right about here, just outside of Cross Sound and Gustavus on Saturday. Friday, looking for a broad easterly flow sweeping across south central, 25 knots inside of Prince William Sound, 30 knots outside, 6-foot seas inside, 17-foot seas on the outside. And northeasterlies continue down Cook Inlet. The highest winds, of course, west of the Barrens, 35 knots and 13-foot seas. 25 knots coming in from the south around the eastern Barren Islands and the outside. 12-foot seas expected there, 13-foot seas outside of Resurrection Bay. Winds diminish a little bit as we get into Saturday. An easterly flow coming across northern parts of Cook Inlet. Southerlies coming in, so all of this feeding into low pressure way out to the west. South and easterly flow bending into Prince William Sound around 20 knots, looking for 4-foot seas on the inside and 9 to 10-foot seas on the north and western part of the Gulf as we head into Saturday. For Bristol Bay, westerlies 15 knots and 4-foot seas, 9-foot seas down the coast with a 25-knot flow. Looking like south and westerlies at 30 knots east of Kodiak Island and AKwx, 12-foot seas there with a 5-foot sea inside of Chillicothe Strait, 20 to 25 elsewhere down the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula. Westerlies continue on Saturday, 20 knots in most areas, including Chillicothe Strait with a 5-foot sea. 5-foot seas down the coast, a little less wind there around Sand Point. 15-knot wind coming out of the west, and 6-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, and a 20-knot wind there north of Cold Bay on Saturday. For the Aleutians, winds almost light out across the west. Northwesterly flow 10 knots and 9-foot seas for you. The central chain 15 to 20. 9 to 11 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, 6 to 8 foot seas on the south side, and 11 to 6 foot seas there on the eastern chain, the higher seas north of Unalaska on the Bering Sea coast with that 20-knot wind from the north and west. A little bit more of a westerly flow on Saturday. Looking for 20 knots in all areas, 6 to 9 foot seas in the region, 7 to 8 foot seas for the Bering. And southwesterlies kick in again for the west. After a break for one day, you get 10 to 17 foot seas there from Kiska to Shemya. 25 knots again from the south and west. For the west coast, northeasterlies are coming in strong still, 30 to 40 knots in most areas, 8 to 14 foot seas out of Norton Bay into St. Lawrence Island, 5 to 9 foot seas between Kuskokwim Bay and St. Paul and St. George, 15 to 20 knots there with a 9 foot sea around the Pribilofs, 14 feet around St. Matthew, and that diminishes a little bit of improvement for Saturday. Westerlies coming off the Pribilofs at 15, north and easterlies still going strong out of Norton Sound, 25 to 30, looking at 11 foot seas around St. Matthew, 7 to 12 foot seas between Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island on that 30-knot wind. For the Beaufort Seacoast, again, a lot more ice up here, northerlies coming over it. North and easterly winds coming down the Chukchi, 20 to 30 with 11-foot seas there, south and west of Kivalina and outside of Kotzebue Sound. Saturday, a light southeasterly wind blowing off the Beaufort, still looking at light northerlies for Point Barrow and southward, and northeasterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound, 20 to 25 with 6 to 7 foot seas, 12 foot seas in the Bering Strait communities there with that 30-knot wind, so still windy. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Winter storm warnings continue all around Fairbanks. In Fairbanks and the Middle Tanana Valley, winter weather advisories for you. Gusty winds to 25 and 3 to 5 inches of new snow. Travel will be tricky around some of the higher terrain and the passes. Winter storm warnings will continue there. The Klondike Highway still has a winter weather advisory. A flood advisory around Ketchikan. Make sure you have a way to get weather alerts tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.